Welcome everybody to another Saturday satsang. Thank you for joining. I've really been thinking a lot about seeking and teaching and teachings. The process has been something that's fascinated me ever since I found myself interested in the topic, ever since I came across the topic over 25 years ago now. It was accidental in a way, or it seemed to be accidental. Picked up a book one day, not intending to read anything. The book was just a prop, really, was my intention. And then when I started reading the information, I realized these are things I had been thinking about, but I didn't really know that they were topics that had been formalized. And I started reading and found myself hooked on seeking information that felt intuitively correct and important. Now, the information on its own, as just information, is limited. Concepts, ideas about how things work, having knowledge is limited. What needs to happen in order for the information to translate into something useful is for the understanding to go deep into the system and to change the system, to rewire the system. And that happens if the system is receptive to the information, and we can't determine that or control that. The system is either receptive or it's not receptive. That's part of one's destiny. And if it's not receptive, you probably won't even know it's not receptive, because you would just turn in another direction. And as is the case always in life, we only find ourselves interested in the small portion of life that we're interested in, and we're not really concerned about not being interested in the other stuff. It doesn't interest us. And so if we find ourselves interested, it means that we have been shaped by life in a fairly unique way, or maybe not unique, but I mean, we're all unique. We all have our unique shape, but only a small portion of the world's population is interested in turning away from seeking pleasure and outcomes, being involved in life in a way that seems meaningful. But in fact, if we find ourselves interested in information that suggests that we turn inwards, information that suggests that the standard movement in life, standard movement outwards into the future, is actually part of the misunderstanding. If we find ourselves exposed to that information and then find ourselves moving in the direction it points at, we can consider ourselves lucky. even more lucky if we find ourselves realizing on deeper and deeper levels what is being pointed at. And ultimately, what is being pointed at is our self, the true self, the essence of what we are, what I as a human being is. What is the real? What is the true? So it is a movement. Inwards means a movement of introspection, of becoming familiar with the inner workings. Then we come to the descriptions of non-doership, concept of life being a creation that is unfolding moment after moment after moment. Life being not what it seems, a dream, rather than a physical reality. And the concept of non-doership is suggesting that those movements that we've always related to as my movements, as my actions, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, are really things that are happening that we become aware of after they happen. And so, as that's spoken about, and as that becomes intellectually understood, meaning what is said is at least understood in principle, not necessarily recognized deeply at first, but the person can say, yeah, I understand what the concept says. The concept says that there is no one doing the speaking, which means there isn't a me speaking, meaning what I am is not the speaker. But speaking is happening. So as we watch the speaking happening, the walking happening, the various feelings, hunger arising in a body mind organism, fear or tiredness arising in a body-mind organism, anger, sadness, excitement arising in a body-mind organism. Not watching or looking for that in a active way, but passively simply being aware that life is happening and something is aware of life happening. When I say life, I mean the movements in life, the birds, the cars, the trees, the wind, the sun, and the movements of people, and then the inner movements that there is awareness of, the feelings, the emotions, the thoughts, and the movement of the body, the physical movements, its behaviors, its habits, and preferences. When we start looking at thoughts, which are part of the intellect, that too, the intellect, the thinking, is a movement that arises in the moment. 1 minute, we may be thinking about food. The next minute, we might be thinking about travel or some tasks that we need to accomplish or complete. And there can be awareness of the intellect moving, the intellect arising out of nothing is one way we can say it, meaning if there was no thinking and then thinking happens, thinking arises. And who thinks? As the faculty of silently witnessing becomes stronger and stronger, becomes more and more pronounced, it starts to become apparent that thinking really has just popped into the present moment and that there isn't obviously a thinker of the thoughts. What I mean by there isn't obviously a thinker of the thoughts is that when witnessing isn't the way that we find ourselves moving through life, and there is a strong identification of consciousness with the body-mind organism, it is assumed that the thinking is an output of someone, of a doer, of a controlling entity that is independent and separate from everything else in life, and that it is that independent doer that controls the movement of the person through life. That's the feeling, it's the sense, and it is therefore the assumption that gets put in place, a deep belief, in fact, that there is a me that is in control of how my life unfolds, and that I am the one that creates my interests, how I feel, whether I'm motivated or not motivated in a certain day, whether I choose to do something or not do something. And the and life is lived with a strong sense and conviction that there is this me controlling how I live. And so that me becomes the one responsible for everything that happens or doesn't happen. for the things that happened in the past, the things that are happening in the present, the outcomes, good or bad, and what may happen in the future. And there's all this concern about trying to control the future, trying to ensure the future is my way, because I believe, one, it needs to be my way, and two, that I can dictate how the future looks by controlling my actions in the present moment. And what that means is we find the intellect continually running off into the future, imaginations of the future, with the aim of trying to strategize and find the best ways of getting there. The intellect will look back into the past and often regret the past, feel like different decisions should have been made, that different actions or responses to certain situations would have been far more ideal. And in fact, they may have been ideal, but the point is, we say that would have been ideal, and I could have and should have done it differently. And this thinking about the past and the future continues to reaffirm the belief of a me doer, controller. And we might at some point start to see that that is simply an interpretation, a misguided, I would say, interpretation of how life is happening. That interpretation, which we could say is a deeply ingrained set of beliefs, creates what is essentially a fictitious entity, a fictitious identity that acts as a filter between consciousness and life. It becomes a fictitious identity that has a very powerful effect on the experience, because that identity becomes the identity that life interacts with. It is that fictitious thought-based identity. And just because it's thought-based doesn't mean that it's not potent. In fact, thinking and thoughts and beliefs, because of their nature of taking something to be the truth, can make a belief extremely potent. It's what so much of the prejudice and discrimination and inequality and fear and war is based on. These fictitious identities that are defending themselves and everything that they believe is important to them in life. And so these fictitious identities are not only problematic because of the trouble that they end up causing in terms of when a body-mind organism includes that identity, the movement of the body-mind organism is aligned with that identity and its needs and its motivations. And so it's not the identity, that fictitious self doesn't only cause problems in interacting with other human beings, but it creates a sense of uncomfortableness on the level of self, you could say, about self, an uncomfortableness that um, emanates out of that psychological entity, like radiation emanates out of a piece of radioactive material, uranium or plutonium. That identity is essentially an identity that by its nature can never be complete. It could keep getting what it thinks it needs, and yet fundamentally it's never going to feel content, complete, whole. It will always feel uncomfortable because that is not the real self. The nature of a conceptual self is to feel uncomfortable with itself. And the uncomfortableness with itself is often a result of feeling uncomfortable with the other. So feeling uncomfortable with the other is really, when we look at it, an uncomfortableness of oneself, and it emanates, or it is part of, that fictitious self's creation. So as awareness starts to become aware of the nature of things as pointed at by the wisdom teachings, and it's not just awareness, it's the teachings are talking to the intellect. The fictitious self is made of the intellect. However, it's the part of the intellect that we can call the thinking mind. It is the psychological aspect of the intellect. There is a functional part of the intellect that can be primed with these pointers, and it can much more objectively observe and ultimately hand over the reins of being aware to witnessing. So once the system has been primed to see what is in existence, starting off by giving the working mind, the functional part of the intellect, information, and awareness and the intellect together start to see what is being pointed at. And at some point, the working mind intellect can stop, and awareness can continue to see the phenomenon or phenomena that had been pointed out in a way that we could call witnessing, where there really is no witnesser. It's not the person witnessing or observing. That may be what is happening at the initial stage, where the intellect and awareness are being directed to the phenomena being pointed out. And once there is a familiarity, each time it happens, awareness on its own can just see that movement. So just like once it is deeply understood what a horse is or what a car is, there can be a witnessing of cars without there being a witnesser, or without being ultimately without it being the person witnessing the cars. It is the self that is aware of everything that is happening in life. Now, that might be a movement that someone doesn't have a familiarity with, because for as long as the psychological self is in place at with a certain degree of intensity, then this silent awareness functioning, where it is self-evident that that aspect is in and of itself awareness and doesn't have to make any effort to be aware. And it doesn't need anyone to be there in order for awareness to happen. And that's when the balance of power is now shifting out of identification with the body and the thinking and the feelings and the emotions, shifting to a position where the true self is now revealing itself. And those movements of the intellect, of the bodily feelings, the emotions, and the body's actions can be seen to be happenings and no one's doing. And so then it starts to become apparent that the me belief, the belief that there is a me, is exactly that. It is an assessment of life that is based on how the experience feels. And because that's how the experience feels, there was no reason to question it. Then wisdom teachings, pointers come along. They suggest that the reality of self and the way life is different. And if there is a faith, a trust, a resonance with those descriptions, then the seeking and the investigation for oneself starts to happen, such that it starts to change the internal structure. And then what is pointed at starts to be revealed. First, we see the dynamics that are pointed at, and eventually the self, a grounding into the formless self, knowing oneself as that. That that is what I really am. So if we are grounded as the formless self, you might, if it's not your experience, you might be able to get a sense that it's from here that outcomes become less significant. If something in circumstance doesn't work out according to the body's preference, you might start to understand that if the inner feeling is that I am not that, but I am something formless that exists, then it might make sense that the outcome is related to with a different intensity or with a different motivation. If the psychological self is in place, outcomes, meaning whether something that you want is delivered or something that you don't want is not delivered, is much more important if we feel like I am the one who is being affected by the outcome. The nature of the formless self is that it really is not touched by circumstance. And if in fact consciousness is of a different order to the physical realm. It may make sense that deep down there can be a faith, or more than a faith, an intuition. And we could even say more than an intuition, but a knowing of oneself that even death of the physical body will appear to not be the death of consciousness, not be the death of what I am. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the consciousness is going to carry on living whereby Roger knows itself after death of the physical body. It's much different to the concepts that the egoic self would have. And it's much more akin to consciousness that is functioning through this particular body-mind organism, the consciousness of source. But the consciousness of source that has split off, not become separate from, but has split off to power this particular human experience. A bit like electricity functioning through a particular appliance. And there are thousands, millions, billions of appliances. It is the one electricity going through all of them. And when the appliance is disconnected or broken, the electricity just stops functioning through that appliance. But the source of electricity hasn't been attacked or diminished or annihilated or terminated because one of the appliances has died. So we could say that the human being is impersonal consciousness of source linked. So the human being comes about because impersonal consciousness of source links to a particular body-mind organism and then functions through that organism as personal consciousness. And when it is destiny for the body-mind to no longer be a vehicle through which the impersonal consciousness of source can function as personal consciousness, when it's no longer, the body is no longer available, the impersonal consciousness of source just retracts back into source. And nothing really is lost. Nothing really has come to an end. From this perspective, you could say nothing has come to an end because nothing really started. A bit like a dream at night. The dream has content. It is an experience. But when there is the ending of a dream or the waking up from the dream, on the one hand, we could say the dream started and it finished. But from another perspective, we say, well, nothing really happened. Because what we're saying is nothing that really affects what is real has happened. So the dream experience was an experience, but it didn't change that which is real. In the analogy of the dream, or using the person and a night dream as the example, which could be a bit confusing because in that example, we're saying the person is real and the night dream is the experience that has a beginning and has an end, but really none of it touched the person. If the dream character was in an accident, as soon as the person wakes up, they find they're untouched by the content of the dream. And then taking a step back out of that analogy, a realization of self is a realization that what I am transcends the realm of life. And that when the avatar of this human body comes to an end, consciousness retracts back to its source, and that source is essentially untouched, unchanged by whatever happened in life. And this is why Ramana has said the ultimate understanding is that nothing ever happened. Now, that understanding, which is not an intellectual understanding, it won't make sense. That doesn't make sense to the intellect, because the intellect and the person are on the level of form. And so for as long as there is the belief, the experience, I am this, that which is real is this. And when I say this, it's the body as the source of me, the source of consciousness, then that means that I exist on the realm, my existence is limited to the realm of form. And so the notion that nothing ever happened, when the experience is that there are all of these form events that are taking place, the notion nothing ever happened doesn't make sense. The notion that suffering is not real doesn't make sense, because the person with a limited sense of themselves experiences emotional, physical, and psychological, in particular psychological suffering as a felt sense of suffering happening to someone, to me. And it's in the process of awakening and seeing the phantom for what it is, meaning the phantom being the psychological self that is constructed with very tightly wound, unquestioned beliefs about the nature of life that then play back into a feedback loop and produce the experience that further contract the beliefs and create this me. And so when someone says something about you, the words about you, it is felt to be very personal. Like if someone was to say, and I find this often when I'm speaking with someone, I forget that, well, for me, seeing shortcomings in the personality, my personality, or my capabilities in certain areas is not personal. It's just, okay, that's the makeup of this human body. It has its limitations. And yet sometimes I feel that in order to describe something more clearly, I need to point out someone else's shortcomings in an area. Because, for example, someone might not be suited to a particular task. And so if I point that out, I'm pointing it out in order to, in my mind, to improve the situation. But what I often see is as soon as a description comes out of my mouth about someone else's capacity to do something, it's taken very personally. The psychological self doesn't, it, it can't acknowledge its own shortcomings. So that very strong set of beliefs is always exploding in relation to things that are happening because it takes everything personally. That psychological self will tend to either be self-deprecating or very defensive and therefore offensive, attacking. So it'll either feel incapable, incompetent, shame and guilt-ridden, or it will feel a lot of blame to others and maybe even pride and arrogance. The psychological self is also always complaining about things. It's very useful to understand the different movements of the psychological self: guilt, blame, pride, worry, and anxiety, and then expectation and attachment to outcomes, which is a movement of the self because the self assumes that it is something on the physical realm, that its existence comes from the physical, and therefore the sense of lack that it has, it assumes is because it doesn't have enough. So it starts to try and gather things that it doesn't have, assuming that that's what will um, fill the void or really remove the uncomfortableness. It doesn't realize that its nature as a conceptual entity is to feel uncomfortable. And so receiving this information, the working mind receiving this, can start to see these movements happening within our own system. And if it understands that those are the movements of the psychological self, then those movements may start to get cut off. There may be, especially if the inquiry, the investigation starts to link why it is, for example, that we are blaming the other. On what basis is the blame happening? And we see that there is a deep belief that the other is the controller of what they do. There is a deep belief that what I need is pleasure and the other hasn't delivered pleasure. It has delivered pain. And so the combination of those beliefs force the entity to hate essentially the other person for not functioning the way that delivers pleasure, pleasure, pleasure to me. And so we might start off by just seeing that that is what's happening and understanding that it's destiny for that suffering to exist in the system. And why is it suffering? It's suffering because it is an attitude towards the other and an attitude towards myself of doership and attachment to outcome. And it is not circumstantial. It's not pain caused by the circumstance. It's a load on top of the circumstance, which might include pain because the other might have stolen something from you or physically hurt you as part of stealing something from you. So the circumstance there might include being hit. So there is pain. And it could also include financial pain. You've lost some resource. That's the circumstance. And then the attitude towards the other, the attitude towards the loss is an extra load on top of the basic pain of the circumstance. And that's often, that distinction isn't seen until it is. And so once again, these discussions, these talks are in the form of concepts, providing information, shining a spotlight on those very important movements that we might not think are relevant, but the wisdom teachings say these are the things that are relevant. These are the things you're not going to hear in school, but you will hear them in the school of life, in the wisdom teaching section. And most of humanity will go a whole lifetime without seeing the distinction between the basic biological pain of a circumstance and then the psychological load of suffering that psychological me that interprets what has happened as my doing and the other's doing, and an attack on who I am because it was pain and not pleasure. So in summary, the psychological me is seeking pleasure, 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 because it believes that what will make it whole and complete and eliminate the uncomfortableness it feels and has felt throughout life. And it is interpreting everything as my doing and your doing. The end of the belief in personal doership, which comes from a deep seeing of how life happens. It's not just where we say, oh, I don't believe we're the doer, and I now believe we're not the doer. That's not. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Not sure where my video has gone. Okay. Well, back on a different camera, but let's see if I can get the real camera back. Just bear with me. Okay. Not exactly sure where I was. Um, the seeing of non-doership, I think, is not just the changing of the belief where I say, oh, I believe I'm not the doer because I've heard it so many times, but rather the end of the belief in personal doership is when the dynamics, the movements that are actually happening have been pointed at, and there is an investigation for oneself and a seeing of things as they really are, which really is just destiny, whether the seeing of clarity happens. It's a bit like looking at a uh, optical illusion, or one of these optics that can be seen in several ways. And it's not really in your control if you see it or if your brain interprets it one way or the other, or if there's a flexibility that can happen. And so you may find yourself being given these pointers, and yet a seeing never really happens. However, if a seeing of these dynamics does start to happen, then the belief in personal doership just no longer is feasible based on your own clarity of what's going on. So that's what the end of the beliefs are about. It's that a new seeing has meant that the old interpretation just falls away. The ground on which the old interpretation was set in place is no longer there to support it. And the seeing of non-doership really means that we see that there is no one here. There is no one as an ongoing, unchanging entity. As the end of doership happens, which is a combination of things in the system changing, there is a deep grounding into the consciousness that at the beginning of the satsang I described as being something that transcends this realm of form. So there is a deep grounding into that aspect. When integration of that realization then happens, which is usually another phase of the seeking, we acknowledge that for as long as the body exists, this experience is an experience of living as Roger. And so there are bodily preferences and personality, thoughts, intellect. The body is going to be able to do some things well, some things not well. There will be decisions that get made based on the body's intellect and destiny, depending on the circumstance that happens and how the thinking interprets the circumstance, and what decisions, which is just more thinking, what happens there. And it's accepted that sometimes the decision is going to lead to good outcomes and sometimes it won't. But it's understood that that entity is essentially a movement that's happening. It's a movement of genes and up-to-date conditioning. And the consciousness, you could say, is what is not mechanical, not conditioned. And the human being is a merging of all of those components. And if we deconstruct it all, we will realize that there really is no one here. What does it mean by there's no one here? We could say there is someone, there is this entity. But that entity is not separate and independent from life, not separate and independent from source. And that's the fictitious belief that there is an entity that is disconnected from source. There is an entity that is in control of what it does. And that entity is essentially what creates the imagined separation. We've never been separate. But there is an imagination of separation. And because, as I said earlier, thinking concepts can be very powerful when they are, because a concept often is believed to be truth, then that thought that creates an apparent separation makes it feel like we have been separated, that we are disconnected from source. And so it's the dissolving of that belief, that identity, that allows us to recognize, oh, we have never been separate from source. So we'll open up for some questions. Francois put his hand up in the first minute, so we'll go straight to Francois.
Hello, Roger.
Hello, Francois. Me? Yes, I can.
You want my camera or you don't care?
It's up to you, as you like.
Okay, no problem. So I will not put it. Like this, I will talk like. In fact, it's funny because each time I have the time to be in live with you, I consider that I have to talk to you. If not, I will not watch you in direct live. So I put my hands anyway, and I don't know what I'm going to say. And the interesting thing is, it puts something like some kind of little fear, you know, like I'm gonna have to say something interesting to be clever. And in the meantime, it's like, oh, that's another thing that is interesting. It's like, it gets me the feeling of it's only when there is some kind of discomfort that I could see something new in me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting how it goes. Like I feel it, and after things start to happen in my mind, different thoughts about being. So what I'm gonna say, and in the meantime, as you talk, it's like I have no idea, and he says that you cannot know, so that's fine.
That's one of the insights for sure. You know, Nisargadatta, I remember somewhere reading a transcript of Nisargadatta, and someone asked, what would you do if someone came in, or even Ramesh said this, into the room and they put forward a proposition of, you know, what might happen. And the answer from the sage is, I have no idea. I have no idea what will happen. Something will happen. But it will be spontaneous in the moment. And, you know, everyone really should say the same thing. It's not just, that's not the case only for a sage. It's that the sage understands. It's only the sage that understands that we don't really know what's going to happen.
In my my martial art practice, I was very much like that. I didn't make any scenario about what will happen if something does that on me. because I knew that my body would react. So it was like, I know exactly that I don't know, and my body will take care of that. I hope in the best way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, maybe I wanted to say something about because I have a very busy life of pleasure. I go out every night in Paris because I'm in vacation and I have the time and the money to do so. And each time I go there, it's really I would say, the curiosity and the pleasure to be at peace, whatever happened. And in the pleasure, so there is a lot of pleasure. It's not enough contrast with my peace because the pleasure is so mixed with it. It's only when there is some kind of boring or even some conflict that peace is so in contrast that it's so interesting. And so it's like almost like each time there is some pain, it's like, oh, now it's come interesting. Go ahead if you want to.
Well, I guess my intuition was to say that that might be because an emphasis on peace is not strong enough to shine through when things are pleasurable. I'm not exactly sure. So what I mean is that when you are engaging in pleasure, maybe the pleasure of the pleasure takes over. I'm not sure. I hope that we don't need pain. I can understand what you're saying, is that when there is pain and we find ourselves at peace, that's probably when it's most obvious how valuable it is to be at peace even when there is pain. And I guess what I'm saying is, as we appreciate the peace of mind more and more, and I think this might be true because you're well, I don't know, you have to answer it for yourself. I guess I'm speaking from my experience, is that I did find myself spending a lot of time enjoying pleasure at the same time as having peace. But at some point, it started to feel like that was enough. There was enough of that. But I'm not necessarily suggesting it's the same. I don't know what everyone's destiny is or how one experiences it. But the shift was from pleasure to something much simpler, the peace, the connection to self. I'm not sure if any of that resonates.
Yeah, definitely. Because one of the insight I had about my pleasure, because I had a lot, it was like, it's not, of course, it's not a problem, but it's like, at one moment, it starts to be exhausting. Pleasure is a bit tiring, it's too much. It's so intense sometimes that, okay, I need to rest from my pleasure and just stay at peace just at peace and whatever happened. But pleasure is like, it's could be so intense that it's almost painful at one moment. So that's funny.
Yeah. Well, you be grateful anyway, because a life of pleasure, you can't really complain about it. But if we actively say, well, enough is enough, I know pleasure now. I've had many different pleasures. This is what Ramesh used to say. I might not have had every pleasure in the world, but I've had enough pleasures to know what pleasure is. And so no need to, taste every pleasure.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's remind you that the teaching was completely right about that your happiness is not in the pleasure, even if it was always pleasure. It doesn't bring the peace. So that's
and you
a
might
good. Right.
You might even say, wow, if pleasure is obscuring peace, so much so that you say, I need a bit of pain to experience the peace, that as well might be an indicator to say, oh, hang on, maybe something is not quite in balance. Because my experience, and once again, I'm not trying to suggest that your experience has to be my experience, but I find that the appreciation of peace, even when pleasure is there, in fact, especially when pleasure is there, and I come back, because there was a period when I was enjoying being out in nature and not working as much. This was about 15 years ago. And at some point I realized that I was a little bit afraid, what if this changes? Like, what if I was forced to not have a fortunate, free time and things like that. And that's when I realized, oh, there needs to be a regrounding and much more appreciation of the fact that it's peace of mind that is important, and peace of mind is not the pleasure. So if my circumstance had changed and I needed to work hard, then my peace of mind wouldn't be affected. And that's what I had to remind myself of. And I think that was really part of the process of grounding much more into this appreciation of the simple peace of mind that isn't determined by pleasure or pain. So I feel that if peace of mind is covered up a little bit, not meaning that you suffer, but it means, oh, I'm not necessarily feeling the peace of mind because it's pleasure. Maybe that's the beginning of a rebalancing.
Yeah. Maybe. And anyways, there is a different time in the whole night, so it's full of different things. And the only thing that stays is peace of mind with a little drop of, I will say, triggering on something that makes the working mind working on it. And it's always, just very interesting. Most of the things is interesting, and you are quietly interested to what happened. So that's great.
Yes.
And
Nice.
I'm gonna let the other people if they have things. I just tell you because I have already planned to go to Ubud, but as a tourist. And as I told you that I hope to see you over there. And I think that if I have to meet you, I will meet you. But just to be sure, if I contact you through the site, you will be able to answer whatever.
Yes, actually, after you had mentioned this last time, I think I put the information up, and I was thinking about it, and I suggested on the information that I might not be able to meet with people because I had several other requests as well.
Okay.
And just to make sure that because it takes a lot of energy to focus on the group.
Of course.
But that will be the general policy. But
That's okay.
as we know,
because
we don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly, you cannot avoid your destiny. Also,
That's it.
And if I have to meet you, I will meet you anyway.
That's exactly right.
Okay, that's just perfect for that. And anyway, it was like even if you were only maybe a parameter of why I went to Bali, I know that it's not for you. I went there. I go there. So
Yeah,
it was just maybe you helped me to choose the destination of my vacation.
more pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, you take care and see you next time. Bye.
Very good. Thanks,
Thank
Francois.
you much.
Bye. Hi, Hamid. Oh, okay. Maybe I'm told Clement first. I'm not sure. Well, Hamid or Clement, who's here? Oh, well, I'll go Clement first.
Hey, hello.
Hi, Clement.
Okay, super. First, I want to express my gratitude. Every time I listen to your sad songs, maybe I'm lucky, but I feel the message is very to the point, very clear. Um, so yeah, I really want to express my gratitude for you to do that several times during this summer. And my question is about the criteria for the end of the search. Because as Ramesh often says, we never really chose to start to be a seeker. It happened. Um, and but about the end of the search, like I think now I understand intellectually. I feel also I experience much more peace of mind in daily living.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part of me wondering why I'm still searching for something. Like I know I am. You know, like all the sages from thousands of years tells me that I am the self, and I can experience it. But there is still this uh, curiosity and passion, even in the absence of intense suffering. So I'm wondering what are the criteria to be able to say one day the search is over? Will it fall by itself like a ripe fruit?
Yes, that's you don't stop the searching, but it stops happening. Um, and for as long as there is suffering in its, even subtle form, then the searching will carry on, but maybe also in its subtle form, where on the one hand you could say, oh, there is no one seeking anymore, but seeking is still happening. So sometimes people say, oh, um, there is no seeking happening anymore because they feel like the seeker isn't driving the seeking in the same way as when they started. Um, so that's a very good sign when the doer seeker has fallen away. But then there is still an interest in satsang, there is still an interest in contemplation and thinking about certain concepts. And so to me, seeking there is still happening, but it's happening in a much more organic way where it is seen to be just happening. So that's why the seeker says, oh, on the one hand, they could say seeking has stopped because the seeker is not there, the doer seeker. I would say, well, it hasn't stopped. It's just changed into a different form, which is a form that shows that the understanding is going deep. And at some point, even that seeking falls away. And we just find, I'm not interested in listening to satsang or reading books. There was a period when, I must have read 100 books a year. maybe 50, I don't know what it was. I was reading one book after another, and not just reading, but it was coming into the system, and I was walking several hours a day, contemplating, looking, witnessing happening. And then suddenly it just stopped. And I haven't read a spiritual book in, I don't know, 20 years maybe. And the idea of listening to a satsang that I loved so much, it just doesn't happen anymore. But I didn't make that happen. It's just something. I wasn't needed anymore, I guess. And so I think this process is, so you say there's the intense suffering isn't there. And so I'm quite sure your seeking is not as intense as it used to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think like the right attitude is, who cares? Like, who cares if seeking is happening or it's not happening? That's the point, because if there's someone who cares, then that would be the someone getting involved in what's happening.
But yeah, that's so funny, because actually the one who wants to finish it, is precisely the obstacle.
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's right. Yeah, if that's it. So if someone wants it to be finished, it makes sense, because sometimes seeking can get tiring, right? It's like, it's tiring.
It's not tiring, but it costs money.
Uh-huh.
It's a kind of alternative lifestyle, like a little bit minority lifestyle. So maybe there is a kind of desire to be back to the normality, or I don't know. But of course, I'm enjoying it. It's a kind of joke, but that's true that there is this energy, like, okay, I want to finish it now, and yeah, just happy that I can share that with you.
Yeah, and notice, because it can be part of the process, that you can notice when the one that wants the seeking to finish is there. That is a form of suffering. I mean, not that we shouldn't get involved in it, just get a sense, oh, look, even that. So if it changes from when is this going to end to who cares? You see our suffering has just, dissolves in that moment.
Oh, by the way, can I add something?
Sure.
So if I remember well, when I started my search, I wanted, of course, to end my own suffering, but also I had this desire, to be of some use, of some service for the world. Like sometimes the Buddhist says, like, may my enlightenment be of some benefit for the rest of the world. So I believe this energy of wanting to finish is also an energy of, okay, but when will I be useful for the world, So the more early it will happen, then I can start to be useful. So there is this paradox between, I want to be useful as fast as possible, and this one who wants to be useful is an obstacle for the enlightenment.
Yeah, I'd also question, look at the desire to be useful, because it can potentially be another form of attachment to outcome. Even the idea of teaching, let's say, and I know that maybe you might not be talking about teaching, but
yeah, exactly, this kind of things.
Yeah, and so sometimes we have still part of the identity is still there, going, oh, won't that be great if I am teaching, because then people will appreciate, or I will be doing something useful. It's like, maybe that's not the purpose of life, you know. So a surrender is like, actually, I don't know what I meant, you know, what God has in store for me. He might not need me to be the one that saves the world. So
What?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for pointing at that.
You're welcome. Thanks, Clement.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm. Hi, Hamid.
Hi, Roger.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Very good. And you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome.
It's very nice to, every time that I remember there's a retreat that's Saturdays, it's very nice to be here. And over this time that I've been near these teachings, especially your teachings, I mean, and Ramesh, I can see that it has changed a lot. And the concept of doership has helped a lot. Guilt and blame and pride, and all the I mean regrets from the past has dissolved. And about the present moment, it is being accepted more and more. And about the future, no one knows what happens and who cares. I resonate with this, and this helps a lot. The question that I have is, I live in an apartment in a place that is a little bit noisy. Maybe our neighbors are not very caring about making noises, and it's not about blaming them, but for example, I'm sitting here and there's a noise, door shutting, and here is irritation or anger arises.
Mhm.
And I've seen a video from you that you said the title was I don't remember exactly. The reactions happen, the biological reactions happen, something like that. You said that for example, less than a minute, something happens, but it doesn't take any longer, and it's biological, and it doesn't get psychological. And I understand the difference. I think I understand the difference, but I don't know. Sometimes there's this feeling, there's this resistance to the sounds. Uh, is it expectation that I have, that I expect to be in a peaceful situation?
Well, there can be some expectation, no doubt, but we also need to realize that some people's structure has them very sensitive to sound. It's a very common thing. And you can have hypersensitivity to sound or hyposensitivity to sound. So there are some people that are not at all sensitive to things beyond what is the average, let's say. And then people who are very sensitive to things. And from what I understand, the people that are hypersensitive, I've seen it in India in particular, you know, there's so many trucks and cars. And the body just becomes overwhelmed. You know, if a truck comes past and hoots the horn, for that person, internally, it feels like they're being hit.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so a kindness in a way, or assessing whether it is a biological response to sound. Because if there is a biological response to sound and you are then thinking it is a psychological response to sound and like trying to stop it or expecting it to stop, it's sort of like hoping that, you know, if someone stabs you in the hand, that one day you're going to be able to just leave your hand there for it to get stabbed. And that would just be a misunderstanding of where the equanimity exists, right? The equanimity is not where someone can stab us in the hand and we go, oh, excuse me, that's my hand, and you move it away slowly. And the biological reaction is not going to be equanimitous to being stabbed in the hand. The equanimity might be our attitude to what has happened afterwards. Doesn't mean, for example, that equanimity doesn't mean we don't call the police and report the person, for example, if they are doing something malicious. Doing that doesn't mean, oh, we are psychologically involved. You can, that can be your destiny. That's what arises. And you could say that's just simple part of circumstance, and it's a continuation of the biological intelligence. But then if the police, let's say, don't do their job, or the person convinces them that they have done nothing wrong and you are the problem, the attitude to the fact that, you know, no retribution happened to the person or you got misunderstood, that's what doesn't, you know, happen. There is a surrender after you have dealt with the circumstance. So it's a matter of watching these responses. And we also need to, at some point, treat the psychological responses, reactions, which are also not our doing. So even if there is a response of doership, who is doing that? You know, even if we believe there is a doer, it's still happening as a result of genes and up-to-date conditioning. So it's not someone doing it. And so ultimately our attitude towards both the biological reactions and the psychological reactions are, yes, that is happening. It is the psychological reactions that can come to an end because the psychological entity can dissolve. But for as long as it exists, the attitude that is going to lead to the most peace of mind is to understand that the psychological reaction is happening because the doer is in place, the belief in personal doership is in place, and this is the natural consequence. And it will end when it's destined to end. So our attitude to the biological reaction, which is uncomfortable, right? If there is a sound and your biological reaction is of pain to the sound because you are hypersensitive, it's also very important in those situations, if you are hypersensitive, to realize actually the problem is on my side of the fence, not where you blame yourself, but you know the tendency is to be upset at the neighbor for making a noise, but the neighbor might be making just normal noise, but because we're very sensitive, it creates pain, and then because there's pain, our tendency is to blame the other. Whereas if we say, I am very sensitive and it's no one's fault that I'm sensitive, and I am experiencing this pain, but I can't expect it's not really the neighbor's fault. It's the sensitivity that causes the problem. So it's also good to see when there is a shortcoming on our side, because if we can see a shortcoming on our side, like a biological shortcoming, you have someone, for example, has a weak immune system. It's not their fault, but the problem is they have a weak immune system. And in this case, if you're hypersensitive to sound, you say, okay, it's a shortcoming. It's not my fault, but it is a shortcoming. And so now I'm not going to go into what might be the normal blaming, moving outward to find blame. So that might be useful. Also, in those situations, it might make sense to do what you can to improve your situation. So, you might see your neighbor outside and say, hey, I don't want this to be a problem because I probably do it to my other neighbor and whatever. But just so you know that your door, that sound comes through. So, if you find that, 2 out of 10 times you remember and you don't slam the door, that helps. But hey, I also understand that you're not going to be able to change it all the time or whatever. I just wanted to mention it in case you can do something. Now, you might know some neighbors are just it's not worth mentioning. It's going to cause more problem to mention it. But especially if you mention it blaming them, that's probably going to not work. But if you just say, hey, keep it in mind, then you never know.
Okay. Yes, it was very helpful. I always had problem with noise. From the past. I can remember different noises, the fridge, the cars outside, and is 4 years, 4 years before we moved here. We lived in the capital city, very crowded, very noisy, and we moved here. And I think, can I see it as a signal that is it showing me something? Do you believe that it is showing me something to make peace with it?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity to, when you see a reaction, if there's a psychological reaction, then it's an opportunity for that to come to an end, or an opportunity for you to accept that there is this psychological reaction, or accept there is this biological reaction. Yeah, for sure. That's how I would look at it.
So the line between the psychological and biological is when I don't want to change it. If I see the intention to change something, is it psychological?
No, the biological will move towards pleasure and away from pain. So the biological will, it makes sense that, these things might even mean you move house sometime. If the opportunity is there, you say, oh, this is a solution to move to a quieter place. You might not have that option. And then if you don't have that option, it's your destiny to be sensitive and be exposed to the sound. And the ideal is if there can be some peace with the pain.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Raja.
Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you. Amit, I think you were next. Then Melissa and then Terence.
Hello.
Hi, Amit.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger, for your time and
You're
the
welcome.
teachings. So I was reading the your blogs on your website, so just to understand more about the core teaching and
Mhm.
confirm few things. So in the blogs at one mention, and today you covered it a lot, and Hamid's question was also around that. So you mentioned that that there is a biological functioning that happens in life, and then further you said that the troublesome attitude of personal doership, and that's also the output of intricate design that processes all life as mine, and this is that attitude there. So what I got is like I'm not going to differentiate much between biological versus psychological things, because biological just a foundation based on certain expressions of genes, which can make someone more angry, less angry based on the kind of food and level of hormones in my body, maybe the day of time of the day, and so many things. So I'm not even going to differentiate on that. I may have to take it as a whole. But then a few questions is like, so when I start looking from this perspective in the science, then I realize, okay, so everything is at the end. I mean, though I feel it, but made it of certain dead materials, which are nothing but chemical, and this whole body is a chemical. I eat certain things, and that makes my blood and my all physical things. So then I have this this person, and I think there is like term ghost in the shell. So there is someone behind these eyes, and I feel it different from someone. And like, yeah, I'm there, I'm here. So I feel like the outside thing I can always uh, say like they are dead, are made of a dead material. I even claim like my body, my hands and everything is made of dead material. But then there is this feeling, this feeling of I, which always like is puzzle. I don't, I mean, I always feel something and I cannot discard that as dead. But then I feel reading and what we discussing here, that that is the what I am. I'm the ego. So I may go out. I can shout at least that I'm the ego. So I just have some doubt around here that so when like it feels like can't be done anything, but I always I have some feeling. So then you say that consciousness functions via these, and also I feel like okay, uh, does consciousness need this complex set of brain neurons and all these things, or is it like equally available to a dead brick, a material, a plain water also? So that is the question that my question. The first is like, okay, I can feel everything is dead, but the moment question comes to I or my feeling, I feel no, I am until unless I'm slept.
Mhm.
And the second is like, does consciousness is just like outcome of it because of the complex neurons, or is it again like, I mean, difficult thing because Advait says it's you can't say it is two, but then we talk about consciousness and versus this. So if you could share some thoughts.
Okay. So your second question is what in science now is being, and philosophy is termed by Mr. Chalmers, I think, the the hard question of consciousness. Where does it come from? You know, is it something that comes out of a material brain, and is it computational, or is it quantum? Roger Penrose comes up with a theory that says it's got to do with your microtubules, which is actually much closer to the quantum effect. You've got materialists that say consciousness comes out of a brain, and you've even got because of the complexity of the neurons. And then you have some materialists that will say consciousness is just computational, and so even a computer ultimately could become conscious. My intuition is that consciousness is there because it is something that transcends the world of form, and that's what Advaita points at. However, beyond having intuition, an intuition that is informed by the change of experience. So in meditation, we can experience things that give us a sense that consciousness is very different to form. But still, do we really, really absolutely know one way or the other? And I would say that that is not something that we need to know. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Now, scientists or intellectuals might be interested, and there may be a whole lot of solutions that come out of knowing, but not solutions for the seeker. They might be different solutions in terms of philosophy, ethics, medical developments. So it's fine for philosophers or scientists to work on trying to solve this question of consciousness. For a seeker, it's enough to be able to know one's consciousness, to come in contact with it. Not to know where it comes from or how it's generated, but to be the consciousness. So what your first, so that's my answer to your second question is, it's not relevant to seeking, to happiness. We might think it is because we talk so much about consciousness, and then we think, oh, if we're talking about consciousness, what we're talking about is where does it come from? That's a question that's actually not so relevant. What's relevant is to know the consciousness, to be the consciousness, and then we still have the mystery of where it comes from. It doesn't matter. That what we find is we find ourselves happy and knowing ourselves without knowing where it comes from. What we do know is that, or what we get a very strong intuition about, is that it isn't of this realm. It isn't of time and space. Whether that's absolutely true or not, I'm not sure, but that's the definite intuition. And the consciousness has a nature to it that is very fortunate for us as humans, that is the nature of consciousness, because that's where our peace of mind comes from. So this feeling that you say you have, that, I can accept that the body is essentially flesh and bone and meat and blood, and you can even call it dead matter or made of the 5 elements. But there is something that is alive, not alive as in energetic, but it exists. Now, that to have a connection to that is what spiritual pointers are pointing at. Now, don't confuse that with the egoic belief or the I thought, the me thought. What you are pointing at, in my interpretation of what you're pointing, is not the me thought. The me thought is a belief I exist. A belief when the I am this, I am that, I need this, you need that, all of that is part of the me concept. The feeling that you have, to me, is a connection or a recognition of that which functions through the human, that is real, that is, that has as its essence existence, I am. That is its essence, I am. And when that consciousness that has that I amness, that undeniable, well, this might be just, if I lose an arm, it's dead matter, but I still am. If I lose this arm, I still am. That's not the me thought. That is the consciousness that you're connecting to. And so the question, who am I, that Ramana suggests that we ask, the self-inquiry, is to come in contact with this consciousness. And then simultaneously through the process also recognize that the intellect is different. The intellect is not what creates that I feeling, because if your intellect quietens down in meditation, you still have this undeniable sense that I exist. When we say I exist, what we also need to realize is, oh, maybe it's not the I that I have always known myself as, because what I've always known myself is this conglomeration of the intellect, the body, and this feeling of I am, all as one unit. And a deconstructing can happen where the physical, the emotional, and the intellect are all seen to be things that come and go. They change. My ideas change. Sometimes I'm thinking, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm happy, excited. Sometimes I'm sad. Sometimes I'm angry. Sometimes I'm flat. The body, sometimes it's in pain. Sometimes it's not in pain. Sometimes it feels energetic. Sometimes it feels tired. And so I'm not that. I'm not that which changes. I'm that which is unchanging, which you have a contact to. A lot of people don't have a contact to be able to say, but there is something, all of this is dead, but there's something here that is. Meditate on that. Be that. And especially in a closed eye meditation, like if you close your eyes and realize that the experience in that moment is completely different to what you're used to. The world of form has dissolved. It's not there. You can't. So our brain will say, no, it's still, I just have my eyes closed. But bring attention to what the world of form experience, because the world of form is an experience. And you close your eyes, there is a experience that is free of the world of form. And in that space, the more subtle aspects of the human can get seen, the thinking, some of the internal, what we call internal feelings. But they might even start to diminish. And what you'll find in that space is that this sense of existence remains, but you might be able to sense it and realize that it remains in the absence of a body, the absence of thinking, the absence of feeling and emotion. So let's say all of those have fallen to the side, but you still are, what you are is this existence that is undeniable. That is the one thing that is undeniable. I am. It's not a concept. It's, you have the direct being of that. That is your being. And that is the consciousness of source. That is, it is we feel like I am, because source is functioning through us. And it's not only source is functioning, so the core of the human being that I am, that is actually all that is real about me, is consciousness. And I would say it's consciousness of source. Now, so that goes back to the question, is it neurons? I say, well, there might be a correlation, between activity in neurons and consciousness. But if in a meditation, I don't need to worry about that. I just get to be the consciousness. And there's a very strong intuition when we remain as that for periods of time. A very strong intuition that consciousness is not of this world. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, hi. So very, very nice to be with you at these songs. I sincerely hope that they might continue, but whatever appears, that's what I will be aware of.
Well, for the benefit of everyone listening, I put up new dates today. So there's one in 2 weeks' time, and every 2 weeks for the next month or two.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much. Yes. So it's very clear to my understanding that no personal, separate, limited, so-called ego could possibly be the doer, and that the seeming the movement of the infinite Sat-Chit appearing in all of its infinite ways must be the nature of reality. But currently, the questions that arise in my mind have to do with the what's called prarabdha or karma, and even Ramana, in his interviews that I'm currently studying, he points to that as well. And so I find myself kind of wondering, and I don't think anybody can really answer this question, but it's kind of fun to explore it. How do you integrate that notion of some kind of, if you will, some kind of memory in the world mind, so to speak, that we might call karma or prarabdha? How does one integrate that in?
Well, to me, when I listen to the word, when I listen to karma, and I don't know the exact pronunciation of that prabda that you are referring to, but it means body karma. And many people, when they hear the concept of karma, because of what karma means within the teaching that they're listening to, it's really about in a way, reward or punishment for good or bad things that you've done. The way I look at it is just part of the destined story that someone has. And we can look at it as the destined story of all of time. Is the destined story includes action and consequence. So just like a character in a novel, the novelist has written the story for that character, and that character, plays out its life according to the script, the novel that has been written. So on page 200, the person gives money to charity. It is observed by someone who understands that this person doesn't have much, but he still gives charity. And so that person then is moved to leave some inheritance for this person because they are always giving money to the poor, let's say. And so there is a consequence, a reward, let's say, for a good action. But it's not a personal good action. He gave money to the charity because the author on page 200 wrote the story such that he gave money to the charity. And in the case of the human experience, destiny includes, let's say, a feeling that comes up, a feeling where we feel empathetic, for example, or feel a sense of gratitude that we have what other people don't, and a feeling comes up and it motivates a giving. So that feeling is part of the destined story, and then a giving happens. And if we follow on this, someone might see that, like someone who's close to us, that we give, and they may leave this inheritance if that is destiny. And in the same way, someone who might be a drug addict, for example, has this intense craving for more drugs, and they are moved to break into someone's house, steal some power tools or jewelry, sell them, get money, and go and buy drugs. And then they get caught on camera, they get caught by the police, and they go to prison. And it's just destiny unfolding. And so when I think about karma, I don't so much think about a personal karma, but rather the story of life unfolding as it has been destined. And why body karma is often brought up in awakening teachings, and in relation, I think you mentioned Ramana, is in Ramana's teaching, he often says that even after awakening, the body will still play out its karma, meaning the body will continue to have a destiny. It will continue to face circumstance, and it will continue to function according to its biological limitations or preferences. It's often referred to because the sage then says, but the sage is free of their body karma. And my interpretation is that what is being pointed at is the definition of the sage in relation to the awakening teaching is that a sage has realized what we were speaking about just prior to this, that they are consciousness or awareness. They are not the body. And there is a grounding in that being. And by default, a recognition that actually the body and everything else that is happening in life is an experience arising within one's own consciousness, the consciousness of source, and that it essentially is not real. And yet the unfolding of that story or that experience continues to happen. And so the physical body continues to have its karma, meaning it will die of, let's say, an illness. Yet the sage, meaning the awareness, the consciousness that is no longer identified as the body, is free from the body's karma, is not affected by it. It is not seen to be what the sage is. So that teaching is put in place as part of the awakening phase. When the integration phase happens, I have an interpretation that says we end up embracing and living essentially as the human, as the person, not such that we lose connection or clarity of consciousness, but I wouldn't then describe that we are free of the body's karma, as the awakening teaching does. But I think the difference is there because awakening, which is this process of coming to realize the consciousness, versus integration, which is bringing the realization once it's happened, and essentially aligning all of the concepts so that there is the paradox of life, where on the one hand, life is not real, but on the other hand, but this is how we're meant to live life out. So integration is where the paradox becomes the way life is seen. And so it's no longer I am just consciousness. It's like I am consciousness and I am the body. That's the paradox. Yeah. In awakening, there's very little paradox. It's in integration that the paradox kicks in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. That strengthened the clarity of that distinction, and recognizing again that it's where one identifies what is the true I am, that makes all the difference. So thank you very much, Roger. That was very clear.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you. I will go to Terence. I know we're a little over time, but he's had his hand up for a long time. So hi, Terence. Oh, I can't hear you yet. You have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Yeah, I was having trouble unmuting.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you again. And oops. I guess I was going to ask you something else, but I was just hanging on one of the last things you said about now I even forgot. In awakening, there is no
paradox.
No
paradox.
It comes in the integration part. And is that because in the awakening part, there's no thinking? So I guess all paradox is in thinking. So is that why you said that?
No, I guess I need to clarify it. Is that what happens is awakening is a clarity that happens, and I guess in the awakening itself there is clarity, but it then tends to take a more subtle form. So, and in that more subtle form, what we find is that the body-mind organism still has a lot of concepts in it. Often those concepts are concepts that come from the awakening teachings that aid in the awakening that, let's say, has happened. And those concepts are usually pretty one-sided. They need to be one-sided in order to bring about the awakening. For example, it will say, the world is not real. What you are is real. The body is not real. What you are is real. So it'll make things quite black and white in a way. In order for a refocusing of attention onto the real and away from the unreal, meaning onto the formless and away from the world of form. So that can create an awakening which is free from concept, but at some point we find that the concepts in the body system are still there. And so after awakening, what generally happens is that there is a seeker, because awakening is not the end of seeking. Awakening is a recognition of the self. And that seeker then has a whole lot of concepts that have been very useful, but are pretty black and white. And so then the integration process is a process where the seeker finds themselves having those concepts pulled away because they're not needed anymore. They were part of the awakening process. And they need to be pulled away such that the paradox can start to present itself, where the person on integration would answer the question, so what are you? Are you the body or are you consciousness? And they might say, well, I'm neither and I'm both. Whereas right after awakening, if you asked, what are you? The person will say, I am consciousness and I am not the body. So there's no paradox in that. I'm consciousness, I'm not the body. The integration is essentially a clearing out of the concepts. Well, a bit like an example of a paradox in everyday life is we know the sun doesn't rise or set. It's a movement of the earth and the sun remains unmoving. And yet we say, I'm going to watch the sunset. Now, if in awakening, or the example would be when we realize that the sun doesn't move, is we say, oh, I can't say that I'm going to watch the sunset or the sunrise because that's wrong. But after integration, we have a flexibility where we can still say, I'm going to watch the sunrise and the sunset, even understanding what's really happening, because from a practical point of view, the sun sets and it rises. Even though theoretically or actually it doesn't move, from a practical point of view, it does set and rise. So the paradox is, or the integration is where we're able to be flexible with a situation such as that. One relative to, I don't know, the human experience. So we really need a lot of concepts to be cleared out or rejigged such that we then start to experience the truth of being the body and being consciousness, or being both or neither. Anyway, I think that's enough said on that topic.
I guess the ending of that reminded me of something I heard you say before, but you seldom really emphasize. But it suddenly brought the memory of how you said that a belief is how a concept is held by the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard you say that once, kind of in passing, but that seems to be actually a really major point of this. And I guess what I had kind of raised my hand to talk to you about is, I mean, it seems like kind of in relation to what I'm experiencing now. I mean, this is the I guess the real acceptance of these beliefs is a real major overhaul of the nervous system. And in a way I mean, a way I've kind of looked at this whole process in a way you're kind of hacking the operating system of a human being, kind of like looking at the actual components of experience and breaking experience into its component parts and seeing this me and how that me and I thought and how thoughts in general operate. And during this process, I was wondering if you could talk to, I mean, there's massive confusion. I mean, it turns your whole concept, like everything, literally everything you thought before out the window, and your whole concept reality and all your notion. I mean, everything gets overturned. And I mean, once you really, I guess, emphasize this consciousness aspect. And I was wondering if you could say anything about that transitional period. I mean, the existential fear, like coming up against real existential fear and like, yeah, real fear that you're absolutely losing your mind. The other explanation is I've totally gone batshit nuts, but
Well, the funny thing is that if you look at the mental illness guides, a lot of the things that are spoken about in awakening are characteristics of mental illness. And I'm not suggesting that the medical side of things have got it wrong. So I'm not saying they're synonymous and they're the same. Because I think the way it manifests, certain things manifest, like not feeling a sense of agency. That's a characteristic in certain mental illnesses. And I think the way it manifests, even though it's described using the same words, the way it manifests is quite different in a mental illness versus in a spiritual awakening. So if you had someone with certain mental conditions and they listened to some of the descriptions, they might find themselves going deeper into the characteristics of their mental illness, and thinking that is what the sage is describing. So could be very confusing. But for a seeker in general, the likelihood is, if you find yourself as a seeker and these things are presenting, it's not that you're mad, it's that the structure is collapsing, and that collapse is I think ultimately a very liberating process. It does have this fear because what we have known ourselves, or does come with a fear for some people, because what we have known ourselves as, and it really depends on how the process of dismantling the self happens, we can just find that it's not there in a moment. It sort of, there is a seeing that the me is fictitious, that it doesn't exist, a seeing in a very experiential, real way that can create a feeling of I'm being annihilated, or where have I gone? not, I'm putting it into words, but I think it exists as a visceral fear where what we've always known ourselves as isn't there in a moment, always seen to be unreal. And it doesn't have to happen that way. Someone can find themselves with a very gradual or even a very clear seeing it's not real, but the sense of I am is maybe very grounded. And so even though the old self has dissolved, what we find is that the undeniable sense of I am is very much felt. So then there isn't a sense that anything is lost, or there isn't a sense of where am I, because the sense of I am, as Amit was describing, is strong. So that is what I would suggest in the dismantling of the person, essentially, or the experience of the person, where we see the intellectual, the working mind, the psychological mind, the body and its different components, and see that they are always changing, they're not consistent, and that I can't be all of that. If there's no groundedness in the actual undeniable consciousness that has its own undeniable sense of self, then it can be disorienting. But if we are grounded in that, it's not going to be as disorienting. And ultimately, the deconstruction of the person and separating out the components of experience is to reveal the self, the real self, the self that is non-conceptual, non-physical, and has always been here, but has, because it's non-physical, because it's formless, that self, that consciousness, feels like it is of the more gross components, like the body. So it's just assumed, oh, the consciousness is here because of the body, or because of the body and the brain. So my advice is try, and don't try too hard, because it will be the seeker trying to try. If you find you try at all costs, but allow awareness to be aware of itself, be aware of its own undeniable sense of non-conceptual existence.
Thanks, Roger. I guess what you said at the end brought up probably a concept for next time, but I guess what you were saying at the end was then leading to the question about the distinction between true self and no self, and if that's significant. But I mean, when you're tied into a very strong conceptual sense of identity, I guess the distinction between those two don't really matter anyways.
Well, I would say the distinction is between the psychological self and the self with a capital S that is non-conceptual. So the psychological self is based on thoughts and beliefs of what I need and how we've interpreted life to be, and how we've interpreted the body and how it moves to be. So that's the psychological self versus the real self with a capital S. Where the confusion comes in is that, let's say, Buddhism calls that no self, and Advaita calls it self. Buddhism, because Buddhism focuses on describing these things in their negative form, because the self is not something, it's no thing. So, and we start off with a sense of this psychological self. So in Buddhism, they are pointing to no self, nothing, because it's the emptiness, the formlessness. That's what's recognized. And so if there's emptiness and formlessness, as opposed to the world of form, So we shift from taking the form as real, and so the Buddhist pointings are saying the true, the real is the no thing, the nothing, the formless. And so sticking with that, those distinctions, they call it no self, not self. In Advaita, they always call it self. And so there have been sort of debates between Advaitins and Buddhists for centuries. And to me, it's all pedant. It's, the Buddhist might think, oh, you haven't, if they hear an Advaitin talking about self as something, because of how, excuse me, how the Buddhist has come to realize the self through negating and moving away from form, the Buddhist might say, oh, you don't understand because you're calling it something, because the word is like a noun, self. But to me, the realization that the Advaitin master has and the Buddhist master have is of the same consciousness. And it's just a descriptive word that is different, that's being used differently. So self and no self are the same if it's self with a capital S, and no self, they're the same thing, which is nothing. So.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Peace.